Hello, this is the second video in the 7 Giants series of videos on geopolitics, the socio-economic and military power of the great powers of our time. The first video was on the European Union, which is an economic hyperpower, and now I'll be talking about the US as a military hyperpower. Now, arguably, the US's economy is the second largest in the world after the European Union. The dollar is still the reserve currency. It's a tool of US foreign policy and of domestic prosperity, because as a reserve currency, all other currencies have to be changed into the dollar before they can be changed into something else. For instance, if the Russian ruble wants to buy German goods, then it has to change the Russian ruble into a US dollar to then exchange it for a euro to then buy the goods, and then the process goes back in reverse. Now, because of this, the US is getting money to not only pay off its debts from consumption of foreign goods and imports, it's also which you'll see in the next video about China, which will be about the relationship between the US dollar and the US consumption and Chinese productivity. The idea of China buying up US debt. Now, this is all due to the reserve currency status of the US dollar, and of course, the more dollars that are printed actually reduces US debt, although in real terms, although it does push up inflation. This is why the Federal Reserve is quite a nationalist, rather a nationalist and a globalist player in the world. Okay, the European Central Bank always watches what the Federal Reserve Bank in America does. And the Federal Reserve runs the US economic policy. Now, the US is mainly known throughout the world, positively or unfortunately, as the case may be, as a military and intelligence driven, and by intelligence, of course, I mean the CIA and the National Security Agency, and there's about 117 other intelligence agencies within the umbrella of the US Central Intelligence Agency umbrella. Some are based on electronic listening in, so if you're listening, I hope you like this video, since it praises American power, or human-based intelligence, people who infiltrate terrorist organisations, or who infiltrate peace organisations and try and make them look like terrorist organisations, for instance. This was all something very well known about during the Cold War, but since it's been talked about as though it doesn't happen anymore, which is ridiculous. Of course, in terms of actual hard power projection, the United States has absolutely massive amounts of military power. It has 10 carrier groups. The EU, if it put one together, could probably only manage 5, and they wouldn't be purpose built, they would be ad hoc. The US military, compared to the European militaries, if all the European militaries were put together, they would of course be more powerful than the Americans, but they wouldn't have that technological edge, arguably, although in some respects, in information technology terms, the Europeans are actually ahead of the Americans, but in actual amounts of high-tech equipment, the Americans have decisive advantages. For instance, the Americans have 50,000 Abrams main battle tanks. It might sound a bit immature. How can Abrams main battle tanks be considered part of a military, part of them being a superpower? But the tank is still the decisive vehicle on the battlefield, in ground warfare anyway. Um, the Americans have the largest air force in the world, followed by China. Um, the Americans have over 1,500 bases around the world. Some of them are large, some of them are just listening posts. They have tremendous amounts of intelligence gathering, which is also used through things like Google and other civilian intelligence, civilian companies. They are gathering information, but they make it available to the American intelligence. Um, the American companies are the together with European companies are the backdrop to our lives. Coca-Cola, Google, Amazon, all these are all American companies. They make the fabric of Western society in many ways, or they have done for a long time. Increasingly, European companies are coming to the fore to replace American companies that have outdated business models. Um, Increasingly, the the American military power is exceeding that of the economic power, and we may ask, is that really necessary for the United States? Does it help them? If you look at the Europeans' health and education, it far exceeds American health and education for the majority of the people. Yet, American military power and the spending on it is far in ahead, exceeding that, because whereas the European Union's economy is civilian, the United States' economy is very much military based. The phrase the industrial military complex has two different meanings. One is that there is an inherent conspiracy against the United States because of the industrial military cabal, which is arguably untrue because they're very nationalistic. But that the industrial military complex as a entity, as a real industrial military relationship, it is so interwoven with also the revolving door of senatorial and congressional politics that is undeniable. The congressmen and women and senators go into politics because they lobby for these companies, and then they gain good jobs, often for only working a few hours a day or a few hours a week for those companies after they've left. That's what's called bribery. There's no other way to say it. And countries all around the world are bribed to allow American bases into their regions. Now, the European Union is also cunning. It uses the fact that there's unstable dictatorial regimes which harm their own people to allow humanitarian assistance, which then allows the Europeans to put their power projection in. You only need to think of Chad and Somalia and Afghanistan and Bosnia. So they put their military presence there. Although it's much more low key than the Americans, and it's not overtly nationalistic. It's done for humanitarian reasons. But there is also deals. There is also business deals being done. Why do you think there's 18,000 EU troops in Chad, and then Libya all of a sudden decides it doesn't want to have a nuclear weapons program? So the European Union and the US use similar methods, but for different reasons. Still, America will still be a hyperpower into a military hyperpower into 2025. But one of my videos will be on Russia, and it will show that Russia will become as economically strong as America, while Europe and China will be the world's top economic powers. I don't think China will catch up to the European Union. I think the European Union will be an economic hyperpower, but it will only be it will only be compared to America a military superpower, because it would be a mistake to become a military hyperpower for the European Union.